Let's forget everything we know about food for a moment. Forget the diet trends, forget the organic versus non-organic debate, forget the way food is sold, packaged, and marketed to us. Instead, let's strip it back. If we were living 100 years ago, how would food move from soil that it was grown on to ultimately the human cell? If you think about it, we're eating, sure, for enjoyment, but we're also eating to stay alive and to keep the building blocks of our body, the cell, healthy with the correct minerals. How would it get to you? What inputs would be involved that would go into the soil to make it grow and along the journey to get it to your fork? And most importantly, what has changed? We assume that food is food, that a carrot is a carrot, a tomato is a tomato. But what if we've been missing something much bigger? Because today, food no longer follows the same biological path it once did. It is no longer simply about soil, water, and sunlight. Those are the inputs that were only required 100 years ago. It is now an industrial product shaped by forces far beyond nature. This isn't about agriculture, it's about how we've redesigned the entire system that delivers nutrients to our cells. And the further we've drifted from that original path, the more we've seen. The further we've drifted from that original path, the more we've seen the collapse of soil health and microbial ecosystems. We've seen a decline in food's nutrient values and content. We've seen a rise in ultra processing and synthetic fortification, including pharmaceutical dependence for us. We've seen a disconnection between urban populations and their food sources as concrete is laid in ever expansive ways. It pushes nature's constructs, the gardens, the forests, and the green areas out. And we've seen a loss of spiritual and energetic nourishment from what we eat. There is a natural intelligence in nature, an unseen energetic quality that exists in all living things. It's the force that makes a tree reach for the sun, for instance, that makes water move in rhythmic cycles, that allows ecosystems to exist in perfect balance. Some call it life force, some call it energetic, some recognize it as a form of spiritual energy gone in a concrete jungle. If food is meant to fuel human life, then every disruption in this chain is a disruption to our biology and nature's biology, our health, and even our consciousness or our livingness, as I like to put it. So, how did we get here? Imagine a time when food was alive from the moment it was grown to the moment it was eaten. The soil was alive, teeming with bacteria, fungi, and insects that broke down the organic matter and created nutrient-dense ecosystems. Plants absorbed real minerals in their perfect, well-defined ratios, uninterrupted by synthetic fertilizers. Plants extracted a full spectrum of nutrients from the soil. Livestock grazed on biodiverse land, eating wild grass instead of nutrient-deficient, genetically modified grains as they do today, producing meat rich in omega-3s, vitamins, and enzymes, and so on and so forth. Harvest was local, around the corner, and immediate. Food was eaten fresh, raw, or fermented, preserving its living enzymes and beneficial bacteria. Humans absorbed food differently back then. A diverse gut microbiome broke down complex nutrients, making them fully bioavailable to our cells. Every stage of this process was symbiotic, meaning harmonious, like a classical music symphony coming together with beautiful sound from the multitude of instruments. Same way in nature, working in symphony, delivering the correct form of nutrients to the human body that it recognized as beautiful incredibly tasting food from its most natural state. But then everything changed. Over the past century, food has been removed from its natural ecosystem and absorbed into industries that see it as a commodity, not as a biological necessity. Oh, I can extract that resource from there and do something with it, is what they say. That's the norm now. For thousands of years, food was an intimate part of our existence. It wasn't something we just consumed, it was something we participated in. We cultivated it, we harvested it, we shared it. It was local, alive, and deeply connected to the environment it came from. And really, it was an extension of how we lived. But something happened. We industrialized food, not to nourish people better, not to make food richer in minerals, vitamins, or life force, or so that's what they claim, but to extract, optimize, and control it. Somewhere along the way, food stopped being food. It became an economic product, a commodity to be engineered, stored, and distributed at scale, removing all the inherent complexity that made it powerful in the first place. It all started with the soil. Healthy soil isn't just dirt, it's alive. It breathes, it holds trillions of microbes, fungi, and bacteria, all working in that symphonic harmony to break down organic matter and deliver nutrients in their most bioavailable form to plants. The soil feeds plants, and the plants in turn feed us. But the moment we introduce synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and monocultures, that system broke. Instead of soil being a thriving microbiome, it became a depleted growing medium. Instead of plants drawing a full spectrum of minerals, they were force-fed nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, just enough to grow fast enough and look good, but not good enough to retain their natural depth of nutrition. And so the vicious downward cycle of depletion began. Once the soil was compromised, plants became weaker, and instead of fixing the soil, we turned to biotechnology to modify the plants themselves and not go after the source. This is, of course, the pharmaceutical symptomatic way. As an example, if we get fat because we eat lots of sugars, then we take pills or work out to reduce the fat. But for some odd reason, it doesn't work because we'll lose fat when we eliminate sugars. In the same way, plants will come back to life with their nutrition when we remove the fertilization and the industrial inputs that go into the soil. So obvious, isn't it? But instead, genetic engineering became our shortcut, designing crops that could resist pests, grow faster, and withstand longer transport. But something subtle in addition was happening. These genetically modified plants were not optimized for nutrient absorption, flavor, or biological compatibility with the human body. They were optimized for scale, shelf life, and resistance. We started creating food that was hardier in warehouses, but weaker in nutrition. Worse, these plants grown in chemically depleted soil produced fewer phytochemicals, fewer polyphenols, fewer protective compounds, the very thing that makes them medicinal, actually healing in the first place. We were growing bigger food with less substance, and yet we didn't stop there. Once we manipulated food at the level of soil and genetics, we changed the way it moved through the world. Food was no longer something that grew near us. We built cities that pushed farms out of sight. Concrete jungles expanded, and food production became something distant, handled by corporations, trucked in from thousands of miles away. Supermarkets replace farmers markets. The storage warehouse warehouses replaced fertile land. And suddenly people stopped knowing where their food came from. Think about this for a second. Most people today will never see a tomato plant in the wild. They will never dig a carrot out of the soil. They will never watch a cow grazing on an open pasture. Instead, they'll walk into a supermarket where food is prepackaged, perfectly shaped, and artificially preserved, completely stripped of its original context. Completely stripped of its original context. We don't question it because this is the only food system we've ever known. But ask yourself what happens when people no longer have a relationship with their food, which we don't. They stopped knowing what's real. And when people no longer know what's real, they become dependent on labels, dependent on certifications, dependent on whatever the system tells them is healthy. Well, what if the system itself is broken? This has led to a nutritional deception. We're overfed but undernourished. We're overfed but undernourished. The food industry knows our food is less nutritious. And instead of fixing the root problem of the soil, the plants, and the way food is grown, they've doubled down, fortified it with synthetic vitamins and minerals, milk stripped of its natural fat, add synthetic vitamin D. Flour bleached and refined, add synthetic vitamin B. Processed cereals that have lost their original nutrients, add a multivitamin blend, fortify it, and call it enriched. But our bodies don't recognize synthetic nutrition the same way they do natural nutrition. A vitamin created in a lab is not the same as a vitamin produced in a living plant, connected to the microbial network in the soil, interacting with the sun and the air and the water. So we eat and eat and eat, and yet we remain hungry because our cells are still searching for something that isn't there or is no longer there. What happens when a world of people is overfed but undernourished? We don't just get sick. We get dependent on pharmaceuticals, on supplements, on external interventions that attempt to compensate for a food system that no longer delivers what we need. And here's the most dangerous part. Once real nutrition is gone, we will forget what it is. Future generations won't even know what's missing. They will think food has always been this way. They will think synthetic nutrition is enough. And at that point, the transformation will be complete. Food will no longer be about nourishing life. It will be about sustaining a manufactured system. Food was once alive. Food was once alive, filled with energy of the earth, vibrating the essence of its environment. Now it's engineered, processed, and chemically stabilized, a static product, stripped of its original function. But here's the real question. If food no longer carries life, can it still give life? And if we continue down this path, what happens to us? What happens to our health? What happens to our biology, our resilience as a species? The modern food system is not just a disruption to agriculture. It is a disruption to human evolution. So what if we don't start asking the deeper questions now? Will we even remember what food was supposed to be?